Okay, wow. So that was a really important film, and it was so sad. So I wish all the U.S. I wish everyone could see that film, especially the U.S. taxpayers, because it's our taxpayer money that is going to subsidize the Israeli occupation, the siege of Gaza, and the bombardments of Gaza. That movie was so sad, and Dan and Max did a really great job of documenting the war in 2014 and giving Palestinian people in Gaza a platform to share their stories. These are people and their stories that we don't often hear in the US. Certainly not from our mainstream corporate media and from our political leaders. So it's a really important film. I'm going to, at the end, tomorrow when I email out a follow-up email to everyone, I'll email everyone a link to that movie. And everyone, I think you guys should all watch it with your friends and your family members so we can get this information out there. And also always remember that this occupation of Palestine and siege of Gaza and these wars in Gaza, they're happening with the financial and political support of the US. Max and Dan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And everyone in the audience also, thank you so much for joining us today to watch this film. I have so much I want to ask you guys. I have so many questions, but we just watched your film, so I want to give you guys the floor. Do you have any opening remarks you guys want to open us up here?
You want to go first, or should I, Max? I can. I've
just
some
really,
swirling thoughts. Go for it.
Just really quickly, there might have been a few cards at the end that got cut off. One of which was that this film was dedicated to the victims of the next war. And so what we just, foreshadowing what just took place in the Gaza Strip.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things I was thinking. I mean, I haven't watched the documentary for a while, but I gotta say, just, I've just tuned in for the last 10 minutes and it had a pretty visceral impact on me. Even though like it's my own work and every frame of that documentary I've seen about 1 billion times, but having, gotten some distance from it, just seeing some of those stories, it's had a powerful effect on me, which kind of surprised me. I mean, there's a lot to say. What Max just said is really key. We intentionally, we dedicated the film to the victims of the next war, knowing that it was a matter of time before Israel carried out another slaughter in Gaza. And it's kind of an eerie feeling knowing that it's going to happen again, and a bunch of innocent people are going to be killed for no good reason, and they're going to be smeared or just not mentioned in Western media at all. And so it falls on independent alternative media, and people like you and Amar. Big thanks for hosting this, putting it together in Massachusetts Peace Action, and everyone who's tuned in. I mean, I see we have almost 200 viewers, which is pretty incredible to me. That on a Thursday night when people have so much going on, that there are 200 people who are checked into Zoom to watch this documentary. And for I saw at least one comment, someone asking, where they can find it. We put it up on YouTube during the last assault on Gaza for free. So you can, it's on, I work for an outlet called Behind the Headlines. We put it on there. And it's also on Grayzone's YouTube. So you can find it on either YouTube, but I think Grayzone's has been blacklisted by YouTube. You can't even find it if you search for it. But if you just search for Killing Gaza, at least the Behind the Headlines link will come up, and it's available in 5 or 6 languages: English, Spanish, Arabic, Portuguese, French, German, and we're in the process of actually getting it in Turkish and Persian as well. So obviously we want as many people to be able to see it as we can. One of the things that really sticks out in my mind, having spent, I was, fortunate to spend about almost 7 months in Gaza filming that and reporting over about a almost 3 year period. And I haven't been able to get to Gaza since 2017, basically when I stopped, when I ended filming for the documentary. The Israeli government press office, as Max said in the documentary, denied me credentials, and so I couldn't get in anymore. And I actually tried to go during the recent assault, and I wasn't able to go for a combination of reasons. One, the Israeli government press office just didn't even respond to basically that's why the Israeli government press office just simply ignored my request, my application for credentials, which would have been totally legitimate, and I had everything I needed. I just didn't hear back, which is kind of remarkable. But one of the things that really comes to mind for me watching, especially that last 15 minutes or so, is I think of the young, the adolescent boys who in the film who are now of age, who are now adults. They were 14, 15 years old in their particular. I think of Wasim Shamali, whose brother Salam Shamali was murdered in that viral video, and we kind of showed his story, and I went and visited him again. And one of the things that you saw in the documentary is he talks about how he wants to be a fighter. He wants to join the armed resistance and basically get whatever justice he can for his brother Salam, who was murdered. And that is like so many boys I met. I did a video for The Nation. You can see on YouTube. It's titled "The Children Who Live Under Israel's Missiles," and it's kind of like a short documentary about the Bakr boys, four of which were murdered while they were playing soccer on a beach in Gaza. Israel launched a couple of missiles at them, and there were 8 boys, brothers and cousins. 4 were killed and 4 survived. And anyone who was paying attention in 2014, I'm sure remembers that event. That's maybe the most the kind of most marked event of the entire attack, 51-day war on Gaza. And those boys all told me the same thing, that they all want to be resistance fighters. And so I always, had this kind of image in my head of these, deeply not only traumatized boys, but, kids who are physically damaged. Wasim Shamali would lose his hearing. He would kind of, the trauma was so heavy for him, he would zone out and just kind of, detach from reality for periods of time. In the Nation video, if anyone watches that, you can see the kid's name was Muntasir Bakr. He has like episodes where he detaches from reality and basically just goes into like convulsions. And there was no way they could help him in Gaza, and presumably he's still dealing with that condition, but now those boys are of age where they can join the resistance. And so it would not surprise me in the slightest bit if they were in the tunnels during this last war on Gaza, waiting for the Israeli military to invade. As so many young boys and even girls, young women do too. There are young women in the armed resistance groups, and so that's just the reality. It's such a severe reality that people face, and I think it's a really normal response that we have to understand in the West why people take up arms, and not shy away and pretend that only unarmed resistance, only people marching to the border to be gunned down by snipers, which of course we saw in the Great March of Return when Israeli snipers murdered, I can't remember the exact figure, but dozens upon dozens upon dozens, and injured thousands of people, maimed them. And so naturally people are going to want to take up arms, and that's why not only so many young people seek to join the armed resistance groups, but they have so much popular support in the Gaza Strip, and in not only the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank, in the occupied West Bank, and just among Palestinians in general. It's pretty hard to find Palestinians, particularly in Palestine, who don't support armed resistance. And so, I think it's a really important thing for people in the West who maybe feel uncomfortable with that to understand that it's a perfectly natural response. I mean, I guess I've been going for a few minutes. I can open it up to Max, turn it over to Max, and then we can do questions. There's so much to say about the current situation and what just happened, but maybe we want to save some of that.
Well, yeah, let me just hop in real quick because both of you guys mentioned the current situation. And Dan, thanks for those comments. I think those are really important comments that we should all consider. But yeah, I want to pose a question to both of you about what's your analysis or understanding of the current situation after this year's events, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, I'll answer that, and just there's a lot of questions in the chat, and I only have limited time, so we should try to cover those as well as whoever else is talking. I don't exactly know the format, but thanks to Eliza Strode for reminding me of our meeting at Powell's Books. I wonder if they'll ever allow me to go back there. I mean, not that everything's open anyway, but yeah. We would love to visit you in Guatemala and show this film. I think it would be very, people there, it will resonate with a lot of people there, given the role that Israel played in the dirty war in Guatemala, in providing them with the technology they used to round up leftist insurgents and activists, and the role that the Israelis played in training the soldiers of Efraim Rios Mont's murderous army. Rios Montt was a right-wing evangelical US-backed dictator who committed genocide against Guatemala's Mayan population. And he said, "My soldiers are modeled after the Israeli commando," who trained them because the US was using Israel as kind of a third party so it could get around the Boland Amendment, which required the president to sign off on any covert action. And by going to Israel and going around congressional oversight, they had the perfect opportunity to basically exterminate the decades-long insurgency. And you can see the situation in Guatemala today. So Israel and Gaza is a global project. I mean, you can look at the siege of Venezuela, the siege of Syria, where the US is occupying northeastern Syria. It's got a carve out in northwestern Syria, and the whole country's under sanctions, and food insecurity now, according to the World Food Program, is like 55%. This is a global project where the US is putting countries under siege that are independent, refuse to bow before its hegemonic rule. Israel's used Gaza as a laboratory. So I think this film has global implications. And I guess on the contemporary situation, what we just witnessed in Gaza, I think can also help us better understand what just took place in Afghanistan. Joe Biden said something that I actually agreed with today for the first time in a long time. He said, "How many more of our young men and women do we want to die for a war that's completely pointless, that the American public doesn't support?" He said what we've been saying for 20 years about the occupation of Afghanistan, and he's getting attacked. And so for once, he's right. Why is Joe Biden saying that? Because a armed resistance group in Afghanistan, which had previously benefited from US support on so many levels, now known as the Taliban, gave the US a bloody nose. They refused to bow down and decided there's no negotiation is really going to be possible with the US. The US broke every ceasefire with the Taliban all the way down to the finish line. And so they decided there will be a military solution, and the empire will finally leave when enough of its soldiers come back in body bags, just like the Viet Cong before them. I don't have anything in common with the Taliban. I don't support their vision. I actually despise their social vision, but that's irrelevant. And in the Gaza Strip, the leadership of Hamas has clearly decided that the only solution to the end of the siege, and not just the siege of the Gaza Strip, but Jerusalem, the West Bank, is going to be military. And that's unfortunate, but they scored a serious blow against Israel, the same way Hezbollah did in 2006 in southern Lebanon. And Israel's very careful not to invade Lebanon again because it knows what the consequences are. So Hamas's armed faction, the Al-Qassam brigades, has managed under siege to improve its deterrent capacity. Its rockets go further than ever before. They can hit Tel Aviv at will. In 2008, 2009, the first major assault on Gaza, they could only hit the border communities and towns like Sderot right outside Gaza. They paralyzed Israeli society. The city of Ashkelon, which is in southern Israel, was completely evacuated. At one point, the full Knesset had to go into bomb shelters. They interrupted a Knesset session, and they did it not over the siege in Gaza, but the war was initiated over Jerusalem, over the violations, an attempt to change the status quo at the Al-Aqsa compound, the third holiest site in Islam, something Dan's done a lot of work on. He can talk about it. But so that's what's, I think, significant about the current situation is the confidence of the armed factions in the Gaza Strip. They feel like they are able to strike back and impose deterrence against Israel on behalf of the entire Palestinian population, including in Jerusalem, where you have 300,000 Palestinians who are totally defenseless. Of course, the West Bank has been mostly pacified by the Palestinian Authority. You see what they did recently with the assassination of one of the leading dissidents in the West Bank, Nizar Banat. But the Gaza Strip has emerged as this center, this node of Palestinian resistance. And there was a triumphant attitude after this last escalation, much more so than the end of the 51-day war, where the celebrations took on a form of, they were an expression of survival and steadfastness more than victory. This time there really did seem to be a very cathartic sense of having achieved something concrete against the what they view as the Israeli enemy and what is objectively the Israeli besieger and occupier. Whether this will lead to anything concrete in the near term, I highly doubt, because Israel ended its assault on Gaza unilaterally. But I think the comments by an Israeli pilot, which were published widely in Western media, are really significant and give us something to think about, which is that this pilot, and of course, Israel never identifies its pilots because they don't want to see them subjected to potential ICC trials because they're all committing war crimes. There's like Captain D. They always are like Captain D or Captain N, Lieutenant F. So Captain D said, we couldn't stop the rockets. We had no way of suppressing the rockets. So we just started bombing these civilian towers, which turned out to contain the offices of mainstream Western media. And we did it just out of frustration in order to vent our social frustration. That is an expression actually of moral defeat and the complete bankruptcy of Israeli society, as well as military impotence. And I think that tells us a lot about the situation. The sad part is that something like 250 civilians died in the Gaza Strip in those pointless attacks, including in a planned attack, an attack Israel had been preparing for years for. For years, Israel had been collecting intelligence in the Gaza Strip through its snitch network, which is absolutely extensive. Every block in the Gaza Strip is honeycombed with snitches it's the most monitored place on earth. And they thought that they had identified the tunnels and the bunkers where the leadership of Hamas and the the Al-Qassam brigades would hide. They believed it was going to be next to Al-Shifa Hospital in central Gaza, and that they could get them to go into the tunnels if they falsely announced a ground invasion. So they told the media, we're invading by land. You saw on all the social media channels of the Israeli army this announcement, which was false. And it was sniffed out by the intelligence services of Hamas. The leadership did not go in the tunnels. The rank and file of Al-Qassam did not go in the tunnels. And then Israel proceeded to bomb with 5,000-pound bunker buster bombs supplied by the US with depth charges to try to hit these tunnels. And what they did was they wound up killing entire families living around Al-Shifa Hospital and hitting no targets of value. And that's the price that the people of Gaza, who we really focused on in this documentary, pay for what appears to be an inevitable succession of future military escalations.
Dan, do you have anything to add about the current situation or the future? Where do we go from here type thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things Max touched on was that this started actually in Jerusalem, which is very important. For one thing, because Hamas, the Al-Qassam, the armed resistance group, showed that it can actually intervene in Jerusalem, and that Israel's policy of basically having, completely separated the Gaza Strip from the rest of historic Palestine is not coming into fruition. It can't be done. And that also Al-Qassam has, such confidence that it can intervene in Jerusalem, specifically in the Al-Aqsa compound. Obviously there's this ethnic cleansing going on with these fanatical settlers. Everyone has seen that Jacob Fauci, if I don't steal it, someone else is going to. That settler from Long Island, this guy. I mean, that was kind of where a lot of the violence was going on, this ethnic cleansing in this neighborhood, Sheikh Jarrah, in occupied East Jerusalem. And then that transferred into the Al-Aqsa compound. And, obviously the Al-Aqsa compound, as everyone knows, is the most important. It's not only an extremely important holy site in Islam for, Muslims around the world, but for all Palestinians, regardless of faith, it's an important national site. They're kind of, the guardians of this, ancient, incredible piece of, of architecture and history. And so this is kind of the Al-Aqsa compound is the one place where Palestinians have some form of sovereignty, essentially. And it's kind of, it contains so much kind of symbolism, and it's so powerful. And this is why, over the last, really actually since the 1920s, there has been an extreme right-wing fringe that has been of Zionism that is dedicated to the destruction of the Al-Aqsa compound. And over the decades, in particular since the Camp David Accords of 1978, in response to that, the far right of Israel began focusing on taking over and destroying the Al-Aqsa compound. This whole idea kind of mainstreamed. And in response to basically the so-called, peace process, to withdrawing from, for example, the Sinai in the late 70s and the early 80s, Camp David Accord, there were all these attempts to bomb it. And then in the Oslo process, the hard right of Israeli society became more powerful because it completely rejected the whole idea of having any kind of peace, of normalization with its neighbors. And so it radicalized even more. Israeli society shifted to the right, the hard right shifted more to the center, and began a process of taking over the institutions, the media, the government, the ruling party, the Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. And then with the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, even though this all served Israeli purposes in order to consolidate Israeli control over the West Bank, it radicalized Israeli society, who doesn't, who are much more ideological and less kind of conniving. And so all of this the irony is that the peace process made Israel so radically right wing, and so now there's this fanatical movement with power in the Knesset. I mean, I can talk at length about this, but for the sake of kind of moving on, so we can open it up to Q&A, I'll keep it a little bit brief. There is this hard right movement with all kinds of power, that is mainstream and even has support among liberal, the Labor Party members to basically take over the Al-Aqsa compound, and basically destroy it and have like a total theocracy. And it's all in the name of kind of, Jewish sovereignty, and essentially Zionism. It's Zionism coming to its logical conclusion. And so with these fanatical settlers who go up to the Al-Aqsa compound, agitate, I've been out there with them. I've filmed them. I know these people very well. They are total extremists. And their whole goal is to create violence, is to generate violence. And so the Israeli, particularly Netanyahu, knows that anytime he wants to generate violence, he can just let these fanatics go and just like send them out there and they'll go stir up trouble. And so basically
they started this war.
Exactly.
I mean, this is, and we have a piece by David Sheen at the Grayzone, which explains this. I don't remember what the headline is, but I'll get it to Brian to send out on your email. But what Dan is saying is this element that he's describing really started this war, but they were weaponized by Netanyahu.
Exactly. And so, Netanyahu has all this like corruption up to his neck. He has these huge corruption scandals. And so in order to basically save his political career and even, potentially prevent himself from going to jail, he lets these fanatics go, go stir up trouble at the Al-Aqsa compound. And the Israeli military, the occupation forces, stormed the mosque in an unprecedented act. I mean, they've attacked the mosque, but never the way they did this time. And so Hamas, the Al-Qassam brigades, basically gave an ultimatum and said, if you do not withdraw your forces by 6 p.m., we will launch rockets. And Israel ignored it. And just like they promised they would, the Al-Qassam brigades launched rockets and they, they landed around Jerusalem. And you saw these videos coming out of, these like Israeli fanatics in the street, all of a sudden running for cover. And so, this of course gives a big like breath of kind of hope and relief, and that there's something that can be done to stop them, to so many Palestinians. And this is when Israel, kicks off this bombing campaign, which Max described and went on for 11 days and killed, more than 200 people, I think 66 children. They killed the chief of internal medicine at Al-Shifa Hospital, the biggest hospital in Palestine, Dr. Ayman Abu Aouf, I'm sorry, who's also, he headed the coronavirus response for Gaza. They also bombed the only coronavirus testing lab in Gaza. They bombed the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. So, one of the other things that I think is different about this time is in 2014, they really, destroyed the kind of outer areas of Gaza. They, just wrecked areas like Shujaiya, which you saw in the documentary, and Beit Hanun. And these areas, they bombed Beit Hanun a lot this time too. But one of the things they really did that was different is attack the most sensitive, softest spots. So they took out numerous towers, which they'd started in 2014, and they attacked Al-Wahda Street and Al-Ramal, which, this is the like main shopping area of Gaza. This is like the main commercial area, and it's just like it's where people thought was relatively safe. And so, of course, it turned out that it's not, that Israel will, destroy entire, apartment buildings with, families inside and wipe out multiple generations of family at a time because they don't know how, they're incapable of basically defeating the resistance that has strategically defeated them. And so Israel has basically proven that it's really good at killing defenseless civilians, but incapable of actually, any kind of it can't hold up in ground combat versus the Al-Qassam brigades, and it just has no way to defeat the armed resistance. So it employs what's called the Dahia doctrine, which is basically to just punish the civilians in order to try to get them to turn against Hamas, in order to turn against the kind of governing body. And so of course that doesn't work. It only reinforces support for armed resistance and the ruling party. And in times like this, there's never more support for a group like Hamas than when Israel's attacking. The political divisions really disappear, when Israel attacks, because there's only, essentially one group, even though there are other resistance groups, not only Al-Qassam, which is Hamas's armed wing, but that's when everyone unites against it. So I think it's pretty lengthy. Maybe we should open it up to Q&A if you want, Omar.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So yeah, I have some more questions I want to ask, and if you guys see questions in the chat that you want to respond to, you guys please feel free to do that as well. I want to come back and talk more about Israel and Gaza and Palestine, but first I want to talk a little bit about the United States and the Congress, because at Mass Peace Action, when we lobby our members of Congress for Palestine, our primary ask is to sign on to Betty McCullough's bill, HR 2590, I think. That's one of our primary asks. We're also asking to cut U.S. taxpayer-funded military aid, U.S. taxpayer money to go to Israel, so that they can't use our taxpayer money to buy weapons and occupy the Palestinian people. But we also have Palestinian friends and allies and people who tell us this Betty McCullough bill, it doesn't go far enough. And recently this year, for example, these rallies in Boston for Palestine in, I think, May, they turned out thousands of people. And we see opinion polls from the Democratic base where average people, they want a more fair and even-handed policy from the US towards Palestine and Israel. So my question for the both of you is, how come the Democrats in Congress are still so behind on this issue? Why are they not yet supporting cutting taxpayer aid to Israel and other things that they should be supporting?
I mean, I'll take that quickly, or I'll try to take that quickly. But the answer is obviously what it always has been: the Israel lobby, which has bipartisan control over Congress. And what is the Israel lobby? It's donors. It's people who donate money on the basis of their pro-Israel support, wealthy people. The Republican Party has the added factor of actually answering to the constituency of Christian Zionists that dominate its ranks, whereas Democratic Party has a real problem, which is why Chuck Schumer, aka Chuck Shomer, which Shomer means protector in Hebrew, he called himself the Shomer of Israel. Chuck Schumer completely clammed up throughout this whole assault on Gaza. In the past, he would have been cheering, go, go, IDF, Chuck Schumer would have been the #1 cheerleader, but this time he had to shut up because the Democratic Party base is turning solidly against Israel. I mean, we all know that. And it's me and Dan, like, we're a perfect example. We're not like some anomalies among our generation of Jews. We are pretty much where so many Jews who were raised in a secular context in the US are on this issue. Maybe we've gone a little further because of our experience and our immersion in the issue. But it's why you see people like Peter Beinart being some less charismatic version of me like 10 years ago. That was a joke, but I mean, he finally came out to be Mr. One State, and he's having like Omar Barghouti as a guest on his Substack, and he's speaking with Noam Chomsky, but he was formerly a paid speaker for AIPAC. And, 8 years ago, he was trying to cut us off from the knees as a liberal Zionist and co-authoring op-eds with Alan Dershowitz about chopping up the West Bank. So now he's giving oxygen to BDS. That's just because anything less would actually harm him among the base that he wants to cultivate online, who are the young progressive future of the Democratic Party. So there's a contradiction within the Democratic Party now, and it's playing out through the antics of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jamal Bowman, who are members of this progressive squad in Congress in New York, where the Israel lobby really has its power base. And Jamal Bowman replaced Elliot Engel, who was Mr. Israel. He was the chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee. He was all behind every sanctions bill supporting Israel. Every pro-Israel resolution had his name on it. Bowman comes in, African-American school teacher, allied with AOC. And you look at the fine line he's trying to walk between opposing Israel's just wanton criminality, where Netanyahu's basically like dancing on blood and daring people to say something. And then he has to somehow cater to this lobby. And so he's cooking up and phony incidents of anti-Semitism. And constantly, he tweeted the other day an attack on Cynthia McKinney, who is a completely marginal figure from the past, who's not even in the Democratic Party. She's loosely affiliated with the Green Party. He called Cynthia McKinney, a Black former member of Congress, an anti-Semite. So he's basically saying, look, I might be a little bit against Israel, but I'm still one of the good ones. Okay, don't think that I'm going to go off the reservation or whatever. And then AOC, where was she at? Just like a week or two before this hideous assault on Gaza, she was doing a talk with a local New York Israel lobbying organization, which had called her chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America anti-Semitic. And she was talking about all the green innovation projects that we, the American public, should be working on with Israel. So she was explicitly violating BDS with that call. Then the assault starts. And then everything heats up online. All of her followers are completely disgusted with what Israel's doing. She's supposed to represent this grassroots constituency. And so she said, apartheid is bad, pass it on, virtue signaling tweet, which actually has no concrete consequences, but she has to speak that language. So the contradictions are really playing out most clearly within the progressive squad. They cannot actually have any material effect on policy because they're so small and because of the nature of the Democratic Party, and they're walking a fine line rhetorically. I think that Thomas Massie, who is a hardcore libertarian Republican from a rural district in Colombia, offered a much more meaningful position than the progressive squad when he called for ending all foreign aid, which would apply to Israel as well. And Israel and Egypt, most foreign aid that the US gives goes to Israel and Egypt, basically to besiege Gaza and keep the Middle East under the US military's boot through these proxies. So Massey's position is actually goes much further than the progressive squad. And what you guys are lobbying for, what all of you are lobbying for, is important, and it's the best thing you can do tactically, I think, with the Democratic Party, is call for a reduction in aid. And it does speak to the American public, to a broad swath of Americans, because there isn't money to pay for infrastructure right now. There isn't money to pay for schools. People are coming out of a pandemic and having their unemployment cut. So we should be talking about aid. That's the best thing you can do. I fully support what you're doing on that. If Ed Markey ever agrees to come to one of your meetings again, you should give him hell for his constant support of $4 billion a year to Israel. And and Dan can totally pick up on this, because in some ways he comes out of more of a Jewish communal setting than I do. But the new strategy of the Israel lobby right now is to not talk about what Israel's doing. And you got to pay really close attention to this, because just in terms of trying to be effective activists, you have to be willing to take this on and not fall for it. The Israel lobby is adopting the manipulative identitarian politics of that have been flourishing on elite college campuses for about the last decade. And they're using the language of intersectionality and attempting to include white American Jews, who are one of the most privileged, entitled groups in the history of humanity, into the broader spectrum of other minority groups and into this deranged fiesta of identity politics, where everybody is creating a multitude of identities for themselves and demanding that they receive special protection, not only under the Civil Rights Act, but from police and from law enforcement, and that Palestine solidarity actually be criminalized because it is an act of hate speech, and hate crimes against Jews. I wrote a piece for the Grayzone breaking down these various incidents that they attempted to weaponize during the last escalation with Gaza, in Gaza, where they would take fights that were often instigated by pro-Israel activists in Midtown Manhattan, and even by Israeli former soldiers themselves, where Palestinians actually fought back, and they would clip out video and portray them as basically hate crimes against Jews who were being attacked as Jews. CNN just ran this major report on it, completely phony report, basically making the United States look like Germany in 1933. And we have to hit back against that, because the Israel lobby does not want to talk about what Israel's doing in Silwan right now, where they're doing these home demolitions. They don't want to talk about Sheikh Jarrah. They don't want to talk about the West Bank. They don't want to talk about Gaza. They want to talk about identity politics in the US, where Jews who are extremely entitled and get to go to these elite colleges are pretending that they are Anne Frank hiding in some secret annex from Palestinian Nazi leftist Islamo-Maoists. So even if you're a Gentile, don't fall for that phony narrative. Just do not let it happen. Do not let it come into your group. Don't let it come into your protest movement, where they say, we want to have a gay flag with an Israeli flag mixed into it. And if you don't let us do that, then you're an anti-Semite. Just don't fall for it. Just hold the line, because that's what's coming next. It's been like focus grouped by all the major Israel lobby groups, especially the ADL. It's being propagated by people like Jake Tapper, who are basically mainstreaming neoconservatism through their position, and it's coming for you and your movement next.
Yeah, thanks, Max. I'm so glad you brought all that up. That's so important, and so many of us have noticed that defenders of the Israeli occupation and Zionists, rather than talking about actual facts and current events, the conversation they're trying to pivot to supporters of Palestinians or anti-Semites. And it's thanks to you guys for pointing this out and talking about it, because I think this is so important for us to understand. Dan, do you have anything to add to that, and also to the question about Congress and Democrats and the progressive Democrats?
I mean, I think Max summed it up pretty well there. But I mean, just, seeing the massive demonstrations all over the world that were unprecedented, bigger than in 2014 during this last assault on Gaza. And there was really, no answer that any Israel defender could have. And so, they really just had to try to change the conversation completely. And so it was like, even before the ceasefire had started, this whole, phony anti-Semitism campaign was rolled out. And immediately, when there was kind of this win in the media battle for, supporters of Palestine, and where just, the average person who doesn't really take a side one way or the other is just seeing the obvious disparities, all of a sudden it becomes about anti-Semitism, where, it's what Max said. It's like, like white Jewish college students are suddenly claiming that Zionism is like an ethnicity, and that if you criticize them, then you're anti-Semitic, and they have to have a safe space and all of this. And it's completely phony. I mean, and it makes me think, the closer that like Palestinian liberation comes, that, you know, they're going to do everything possible. Zionists are going to do everything possible to gaslight us into believing that there is some genocide of Jews imminent. And that's really what we saw. And so, you know, it's the exact same tactic that we saw deployed against Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party in the UK, and how successful that was, not because it has to be successful, but sadly because Corbyn played into it. He apologized for something and basically gave gave it oxygen. And so, you know, it's all obvious in hindsight now. And I think for you know, some people it was at the time, and now it should be for everyone. So, you know, progressives in the US have to be on guard about it. And it's really tempting to, you know, to kind of virtue signal for people and say, oh, well, we denounce anti-Semitism, you know, but as if it's even there. But if it's not there, why do you have to denounce it? And it's just a way to undermine Palestine solidarity, change the narrative, and make you know, the aggressors and the oppressors look like the victims.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so cynical because it's like trying to speak to our values of like inclusivity and anti-racism for what? To essentially justify an occupation of the Palestinian people. Okay, so I have one more question for Max. I think we may have to let him go soon. We might have one or two more questions for Dan. We'll get ready to wrap this up before 8:40. So Max, I think the last question for you here is, because I've heard you talk about this a little bit. Can you talk a little bit, can you break down for us how people who are supportive for Palestinian rights and ending the occupation and anti-Zionists and stuff, how there's kind of like this divide and different views about Syria, and how the conflict in Syria is like a contentious issue in some of these communities. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I don't know which aspect you want me to talk about, but I would just say that 100% of I came to a resolution about it after years of searching and realizing I got it wrong initially, and that I kind of fell for a completely confected narrative about a, you know, revolutionary uprising against the evil dictator. And I think that everything I've reported since then has been completely vindicated. And that's why you never see anyone actually challenge the facts that we publish at the Grayzone. They just insult us. They call us genocide deniers, Assadists, or maybe they're calling us ass sadists, but I think they're calling us Assadists. I'd never heard this term before they started insulting us. But, you know, it's just an endless collection of smears, and we just keep hammering away with the facts. I mean, you can read all of Aaron Mate's reporting on the corruption of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons by the US empire and its vassals over the incident in Duma in April 2018, which was so obviously a staged incident designed to cross the red line and generate US intervention. The Syrian opposition has done this again and again. There have been so many scandals. I really, really recommend this 30-minute documentary Dan made for us. I mean, we just have so many cards to throw on the table that, you know, you could busy yourself for like weeks with all this stuff that's going to come out in this email that Brian sends you all. But Dan's documentary for us, the Syria deception. I mean, if you have any questions about the corporate media and its reporting on Syria, this is going to blow your mind, because it just shows what a titanic deception was waged on the American public to try to get us past Iraq war syndrome and get us to support another intervention and to bump off another country on the neocon hit list. And that's all Syria was about. And all we have to do is look at what's been happening in Syria since the US kind of rolled back one of the most evil things that it's done in the Middle East ever, which is send it billions of dollars of aid and weapons to jihadist death squads to destroy a country. And since it rolled back that program, the US has occupied northeast Syria around the city of Deir ez-Zor, It is literally occupying the Al Omar oil field, which supplies something like 70% of oil to Syria. Why? They say, oh, we're trying to protect the oil fields from ISIS. We're protecting the oil. No, they're starving Syria deliberately of its own resources to cause poverty. Just the same way that Israel's doing to Gaza, the same way the US is doing to Venezuela, and they're depriving it of its own oil revenue. They don't want Syria to be prosperous and independent. They don't want a strong Arab state in the middle of the Levant. So they got the oil fields. What else is there in northeast Syria? The breadbasket of Syria, all of the wheat fields. Wheat is so important to any independent nation. Like, it's why you see a lot of nations in Africa or Tunisia, for example, they have to produce all of these fruits like pomegranate and so on, or strawberries or flowers in Uganda for export. They don't have big wheat fields. Syria always had big wheat fields so it could feed itself and withstand siege. It's like for a war economy, that's what you have. So they're burning the wheat fields. The US is occupying the wheat fields. They can't provide the wheat to Damascus and the core cities to make bread. So they're having bread lines. They're having gas lines. The country is poor when it was previously wealthy, and the US troops are there and they need to leave. And we were attacked for saying hands off Syria by all of these clowns, this kind of coalition of Syrian exiles who behave just like Miami Cubans do in trying to use the US to wage war on their former country, and Trotskyist whack jobs who try to claim that there's this ongoing revolution and that Jabhat al-Nusra, the local al-Qaeda franchise, were actually good revolutionaries, as the official newsletter of the International Socialist Organization explicitly declared. And they tried to convince us of that for years, and it's so obvious what's unfolding before our eyes. Their whole argument is falling apart, and Israel has waged hundreds of attacks on Damascus, on Syria. Every week, there's another Israeli attack on Damascus, and nobody says anything. Nobody says a word who is talking about the so-called Syrian revolution, because they like it. They want to see the state reduced to nothing. This is about people in Syria, regardless of what they believe, who are being sanctioned to death. And we don't have a movement against that. And it's partly, it's entirely because of these people who infiltrated the left in the US to destroy an anti-war movement, to shatter Palestine solidarity, and to wage counterinsurgency. And we need to have this movement, because now that the US is out of Afghanistan, it needs to get the hell out of Syria and Iraq. The Biden administration just attacked Syria and Iraq, and it did so on the basis of international law. It's illegally occupying Syria, and the Iraqi parliament voted that the US must leave, that it's illegally occupying Iraq. So this is such an important point that should be at the top of the agenda of any anti-war group. And I don't know what else anyone can say against it, except to try to insult me or say, that Vladimir Putin is controlling my brain with like FSB gamma rays or whatever. They don't have anything factual to say. It's really just about whether Syrians should be able to feed themselves at this point. And we know that Israel is right there, and it does not want a strong Arab state capable of resistance. So that's what it's about.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Max. Your position on Syria is we're in large agreement at Mass Peace Action, and our director Cole Harrison and our board member Jeff Klein, they shared a statement that Mass Peace Action has written about Syria, so people can check that out if they want to. I should have said this in the beginning because I assumed everyone knew who Max and Dan were, but in case people don't know, they are the filmmakers who made Killing Gaza, which we all just watched together. Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen are both journalists. Max founded and edits the Grayzone News, and Dan is with Behind the Headlines. So if people are interested in what they're saying or want to follow up more on their work, you guys can follow Max and Dan on all the social medias. And Max has a couple of books, including the most recent one called The Management of Savagery.
I have a book on Gaza that, just, if anyone wants to read this and go even deeper than our film might have been able to do, it's called The 51-Day War. And yet I gotta bounce now, but thank you so much for screening this film. Thank you to everyone who showed up. And I'm glad that you took like 2.5 hours out of your day. I know your time is valuable too. And, continue to follow us at the Grayzone. We have so many articles on a lot of the issues that have been coming up in the chat. One question was ISO a CIA front? Well, we have a piece about the ISO that I think would be very interesting to that questioner, Jay Wilberforce. And there's a statement about Colombia. Dan has a short documentary coming out about Colombia and an article about Colombia-Israeli ties. So, I mean, this conversation could go on endlessly. And I also want to thank Mass Peace Action for standing up against the new Cold War on China. That's something that will be plaguing us as Americans for the rest of our lives, unfortunately, unless there's a radical change here. And I thank you for continuing to host us and standing up against pressure to not do so. So, I really respect this organization. If there's anything I can do to help in the future, I know Dan feels the same way, let us know.
Great. Thank you, Max and Dan, both of you so much for the film and all your work. I just want to let both of you know that a lot of people messaged us, like dozens and dozens of people saying they couldn't make it, but they want the links, and we'll send everyone the links. So you guys do really great work, and it complements it's necessary for the work we do here. So thank you so much. Dan, I think we'll ask you one more question before we sign off. Max, thank you so much for being with us. Dan, for the last question of the night, people were asking in the chat, and I'm curious myself. I'm not fully aware of this story, but I've seen you like kind of reporting on it. What's this connection that you've been reporting on between Israel and Colombia? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. First, I saw somebody asking the name of the video that Max mentioned that I did on Syria. It's called The Syria Deception, and it's on Grayzone's YouTube channel. Maybe someone. Brian, you can link it in that email, in the essay length email. But yeah, so I did a piece, I guess it was released, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, on basically Israel's role in genocide in Colombia. What a court ruled was a political genocide in starting in 1984 and technically went until 2002, but really never stopped. And so basically, this was actually a revelation that came out in January in Colombian media, but wasn't picked up in English language media at all. And so I kind of took that and then went into a lot of other kind of history of Israel training paramilitary death squads in Colombia, and then how that kind of set the stage for current Israel-Colombia relations. So basically, right now, there's another, what you could call a political genocide going on in Colombia. I mean, I'm sure everyone has seen there are these mass protests going on, but in addition to that, since 2016, in 2016, there was a peace accord signed between the government and the FARC, what is like a left-wing rebel group that was very powerful for many years, but they had been basically beaten down by the Colombian government with big major assistance from the CIA. And so when the FARC laid down their arms and agreed to reintegrate into society, the Colombian government then began assassinating them. Now they're defenseless, and so since 2016, they've killed about 250, a little more than 250 now, ex-FARC combatants, and something like 1,150 approximately social leaders as well, who are, basically rural peasants who organize against, international corporations who are pillaging resources in Colombia, oil, gold, minerals, these kinds of things, and also against the international drug cartels, that are basically feeding the U.S. and Europe's insatiable demand for cocaine. And so, this extermination of left-wing kind of progressive leaders, indigenous people, Afro-Colombians, peasants of all kinds, are, they're being wiped out. You see the Israeli military has an advisor role there. And in September of 2020, as the most massacres of 2020 were taking place, the Israeli military was there. Last year and this year, the Colombian government spent millions and millions of dollars on Galil assault rifles from Israel. They have Israeli drones. So Israel plays a pretty remarkably big role, of course, in addition to, the main player was the United States, but Israel has an outsized role in Colombia. And this really picks up in 1984. And it's kind of actually what's going on now is history repeating itself. So in 1984, you have the liberal president, Betancourt, made a peace agreement with the FARC, where the FARC basically took their struggle to the political arena, and they formed a political party called the Patriotic Union. And the Patriotic Union basically was not only FARC combatants, but also communists, union leaders, just left-wing progressive people in general. And so then there's another election in '86, and right soon after this election, the Patriotic Union members start getting assassinated, and the pace really picks up. And basically they assassinated multiple presidential candidates. They assassinated thousands of members of the party, to the point where, and this went on for basically 2 decades, to the point where in 2002 they were removed from the electoral authority removed the Patriotic Union as a party because they didn't have enough people to essentially qualify. So this was what, as I said, a Colombian court ruled was a political genocide. So at the same time in the 1980s, not only do you have this genocide, this political genocide of the Patriotic Union going on, you also have an Israeli mercenary named Yair Klein, who basically, retired from the Israeli military doing, counterterrorism, and started a mercenary outfit. He sold weapons to the Christian Phalangist militias in Lebanon, which carried out the infamous Sabra and Shatila massacres that Israel oversaw, which, I presumably people, know what happened there. And then he lands in Colombia and ends up training some paramilitary figures, including the Castaño brothers, who became the most feared, gruesome, horrible death squad leaders that would just terrorize the country essentially to this day. These death squads still exist, just in kind of different formations and with some different leadership. And these were trained by Israel. They're actually a product. They were actually the idea of paramilitaries in Colombia was created on advice and training from the U.S. originally in the 60s in order to defeat the FARC. But the modern death squads started under Israeli training in the 80s. So a lot of this has been known. All of this stuff has basically been known, since about 1990. They knew about the role of Yair Klein in Colombia. And, really any progressive in Colombia knows who this guy is. What they don't know, what came out in January is that political genocide of the Patriotic Union was actually ordered by the president. Virgilio Barco was his name. And it was advised by an Israeli spy named Rafi Eitan. Rafi Eitan was also he was a spy who oversaw the Jonathan Pollard campaign operation in the United States to basically steal naval intelligence documents for Israel. And so basically, Eitan was indicted he was an unindicted co-conspirator. So the U.S. went soft on him, allowed him to go back to Israel. He got a cushy job in one of Israel's biggest state-owned companies. And in his free time, he went to Colombia to basically advise the president on how to commit genocide, a political genocide. And so this is where it came out. And so my piece kind of, details all of this and explains it all. And so, it's just remarkable. I mean, Max talked about the role of Israel and Guatemala, and the horrors that happened there under the Rios Montt dictatorship. And of course, what happened, as I just described, in a Colombian so-called democracy. That's one of the remarkable things about all the horrors that have, happened in Colombia, is this all took place under ostensible democracy. Colombia hasn't been in a official dictatorship, I think, since like the 50s. So yeah, I mean, my piece was published at Mintpress News. It's called Investigation Reveals the Role of Israel in Colombia's political genocide, something along those lines. And yeah, that's basically what happened.
Okay, we will find your piece and link it in the follow-up email along with the 30 other resources we're sharing. You guys produce so much great content, and we're happy to share it with people. So let's get ready to wrap up the program. I just want to plug in two things in the chat real quick. One, Brian Garvey, our assistant director, he shared this link. I just reshared it in the chat about if people click on the link, it'll send a message to their member of Congress to sign on to the Betty McCullough bill. This is our legislative vehicle to condition at least some of the US taxpayer money to Israel, and only one Massachusetts Congress person has signed on so far. So please do click that. And also I'm going to share an email address for Marilyn Frankenstein. She is an organizer and an activist with Boston BDS. They're really focused on BDS with the Puma building in Massachusetts and other BDS targets. So if anyone is interested in BDS activism, please send Marilyn an email. Someone's asking which Mass Congressperson is signed on, and the answer is Ayanna Pressley to Betty McCullough's bill. So Dan, thank you again so much for being with us tonight. The film was really great. It was really profound and so sad, as I've said, but so important for all of us to see. Dan, are there any last words you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I mean, first, again, I just want to thank you and everyone who took hours out of their night to watch the documentary and listen to us talk, and really means a lot. I appreciate it, and I hope you'll have me on again. Max said I actually have a very lengthy documentary on Colombia. I was there last December. It's not short, it's very long. I'm trying to shorten it, coming out within the next couple of months. And then I actually have this one will be maybe 20-30 minute documentary on the recent assault on Gaza, coming out in a couple of weeks. I managed to pay a crew to film because I couldn't go myself. So watch out for that. And all my work goes up at Mintpress News, and at Behind the Headlines is where I work, though they're sister sites. So check out our YouTube channel. It's all video. I do mostly video work. So it's, just look up Behind the Headlines or Behind the Headlines Dan Cohen sorry, my mom just called me on FaceTime. So yeah, just check out Behind the Headlines on YouTube, and yeah, feel free, email me, message me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. And thank you all again, and thanks, Omar, for hosting.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, we'd love to have you back in the future. We'll keep an eye out on your future work. So thanks again, Dan, for being with us, for making that film, for all the work you do. And thank you especially to everyone who, as Dan mentioned, took time out of your day to watch this film and to be with us today. So everyone, thank you so much. And on that note, I'll say, everyone, please have a great night.